Trapped by the Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've been listening to your show for a while, and I'm most interested when your story submitters discuss their shifting opinions about whether the Dogman is real, or paranormal, or from another dimension, or whatever other theories they may have. I myself had a pretty harrowing Dogman experience that I was mostly unable to speak about for years. I still have to leave certain details out, even now when I discuss this, for reasons which I hope will become obvious as we get into it. But I can tell you my personal theory about what the Dogman is before we even get started. Dogman is an animal that lives in North America and possibly Central America. It hunts and scavenges for the majority of its diet, which is either largely or entirely meat. There are some stories about the Dogman involving berries, but those are so strange that I think they might be about a different kind of Dogman. Maybe there are supernatural or extra-dimensional Dogmen as well, and maybe these eyewitness accounts with berries are describing that. The Dogman I had to deal with displayed intelligence, at least an intelligence for hunting, far beyond my brain power. I literally walked right into his trap. Now let's jump right into it, together. Now I'm going to speed walk through the parts you need to know about my background so that you understand the context that my several day-long encounter with the Dogman took place in. First, I was in the Midwest. Second, I was divorced. And third, I owned my own home in the suburbs. I made a down payment on that land with the remainder of my former savings after the divorce, and it's in an area that I was really not familiar with at all before I found myself there. I had lived in urban and suburban areas, but this house was surrounded by woods and you couldn't see any neighbors. I won't lie, it was very close to the major metropolitan area that I worked in by car, but our thick neighborhood tree cover led to a natural corridor that stretched into officially sanctioned wild areas. I felt like I was way further out into the middle of nowhere than I actually was, at least until it came time to make a mortgage payment. Then I was reminded of how close I was to the city by the inflated price tag. Still, when I first moved there, I had plans of using it for work-related parties on the one hand, and for the possible wooing of a potential second wife on the other. When the Dogman started hanging around, I became more shy though. I was scared of the idea of the Dogman doing something to someone that I had invited there. Part of my business was dependent on me socializing with clients, so the Dogman was robbing me of more than just sleep. The first time I saw the thing was after my then girlfriend ran into the room, screaming that she'd seen what she called an upright walking dog corpse out the bathroom window. I ran toward the bathroom, but I could see the thing from a room that was closer to me. I remember standing there, by the window, transfixed, my eyes not believing the visual information that they were sending to my brain. My girlfriend had not been exaggerating in her colorful description. It was a really big dog, walking like a zombie outside the window. It was walking from my right to my left, its arms held out in front, like that movie where the Frankenstein monster went blind. I guess you could say it was walking like a zombie in a really old horror movie, or like Lon Chaney Jr. as the Mummy, sort of. It kind of limped, and it seemed to be filthy. I don't think this dog had groomed in a very long time, so I was thinking maybe it was in poor health. By this point, my then girlfriend was standing at the doorway to the room I was in, begging and whining at me to come away from the window for whatever reason. She was saying we should go upstairs and hide until the hideous ungroomed monster canine went away. The more she talked, the harder it was for me to concentrate on that thing out there. Finally, I got annoyed enough at her that I turned around and barked out at her. There was just some sick old dog outside. It must have injured front arms, and so it was limping along on its rear legs instead. I castigated her for being scared of an animal that she should have pity for. In the next instant, I watched my girlfriend look in horror out the window behind me, and then silently run away. I spun and saw that poor injured dog that I was saying we should pity, barreling toward me, down on all four legs, which sure seemed healthy once they were in motion. I quickly joined my girlfriend in the hallway, slamming that room door shut behind. We both locked ourselves in the upstairs bedroom and waited, listening for glass to break or other sounds of forced entry. We didn't hear the creature any more that night, but we hadn't seen or heard him leave either. I couldn't calm down that night, which I spent walking from window to window up on the second floor, looking outside for wherever that monster might be hiding. Neither of us could figure out why the thing was walking as though it were in pain when we first saw it. It had clearly been capable of graceful, speedy running all along. Had it been faking an injury to invite attack? Because, as far as I know, the only creatures in nature that tend to attack are the predators, the meat eaters. If you fake an injury in the woods, you're not likely to attract herbivores, only carnivores or omnivores. In other words, hunters. Why would you want to do that? Who hunts other hunters? Because that's basically what that would be, assuming the limping display had been a put-on. So I wasn't only concerned about the creature seeming to be as large as the 6'6" guy that my wife dumped me for, I was also concerned that he seemed smart enough to easily trick me, like the 6-foot guy that my wife dumped me for. I started inviting myself over to my girlfriend's place, as I dreaded bringing anyone out to mine. I tried to get out of the mortgage, but there was no clause saying I could get my money back in case of Dogman. So then next I tried to sell the house. I tried to rent the house. I tried to give it back to the real estate people at a discount. I just wanted an apartment in the city. The idea of being surrounded by old trees that grew taller than my house itself, that no longer seemed soothing or relaxing. I didn't care how quaint or pretty it all looked in the daytime, as most social entertaining is done at night. And at night, those grounds belonged to the Dogman. I was becoming frazzled, and my nerves were on edge. I started getting irritable, and soon my girlfriend and I broke up. Without her, I had nobody to talk to about the Dogman. Sometimes it would slip out in conversation, and people increasingly began backing away from me, thinking that I was going crazy. I started feeling isolated and trapped out in that place. And then, the Dogman literally trapped me. I had been hearing weird sounds outside for a few nights again, but I was too scared to look and see what might be there. Finally, one morning, it was so bright and sunny with orange leaves blowing around everywhere that I just couldn't feel scared at all. I found a rake in the shed, and I started raking the leaves up into larger and larger piles. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with those piles yet, as I was still making up my own autumn ritual. It felt good to be outside, moving my limbs, not inside, compressed into a frightened ball. That was the best I had felt in a really long time. I started to realize that there was a way I could stay in the city, even without finding a buyer for the house. I started to mentally plot my escape from Dogman's neighborhood as I raked the leaves that morning. And then, with my sights firmly set on the bright new future I would create for myself, I didn't notice the gaping cavity opened up in front of me. I stepped into a hole in my own backyard. It had to have been around 10 feet deep. I banged my head and twisted my ankle a bit on the way down, and it felt like I'd just been punched out by a heavyweight boxer. I mean, I was in bad shape, and more than a little surprised. I wanted to get up and figure out what was going on, but I was in way too much pain down there in the dirt at that moment to think very clearly about much of anything. It didn't feel that I had any broken bones in the fall, and it seemed that I did have mobility, but my neck and cheek both hurt so much that I didn't want to use them if I didn't have to. The hole was long enough for me to lie down in, but just barely. It was shaped too much like a grave for my liking. I lay there, looking up at the sky, with a rake laying across the top of the hole. When I started to be able to formulate coherent thought again, my first thoughts were about getting my hands on that rake. I feel like I could get out of the hole if I could get hold of the rake first. The sky darkened, which frightened me, and made me feel a sense of claustrophobia. No longer was I looking into the open sky while waiting for my soreness to subside. Now I felt covered in a dark, inky blanket, and I needed to get out of there. It took a while to work myself into a sitting position, and I braced myself for climbing to standing. Once the pain of that subsided, then I figured I'd work out my plan of escape. I never did get up off my butt that night, though, as I heard heavy footsteps approaching. I felt like calling out for help, but the fact that the sounds were coming from the direction of the forest and not from the house made the words freeze silently in my throat. What if that was not a rescuer approaching? My fear was realized in the hideous form of this dog-headed beast man. Most likely, it was the same one I had seen before, the same one that broke up my relationship, the same one that had ruined my job. He looked down at me, his glowing eyes giving him an otherworldly or supernatural kind of an appearance. And he laughed at me in a sound not unlike that emitted by a hyena. He picked up the wooden rake that had been lying across my grave hole, and he snapped it in two. Then, he flung one half of the broken wood at me in the hole, sharp side, in my direction. I got out of the way of that spear in time, but he threw it so hard that the wood was inches deep into that deep trench floor. He made hyena sounds at me again and then left. Luckily, he never threw the other half of the rake at me. What I saw looking down at me was the most muscular humanoid figure I'd ever seen, but it also had long, filthy, matted fur all over, and seemed as though it had never groomed in its life. I could smell its animal musk in the air for a few minutes after our encounter that night had ended. The head of the creature, especially with those gas station exposed light bulbs for eyes, really did seem like they took something dead and in hell and brought it up here to walk around. It looked alive, but it also just didn't. I don't think it was a mask or costume or makeup or animatronic puppet or any trickery at all. But at the same time, it really did look like something which had been dead for a few weeks before it got resuscitated. Once the dog thing seemed to have left, I began trying to climb up the dirt side of the hole. It was surprisingly loose, and the more I tried to climb it, the more dirt caved in from the sides. It was soft, but it was also moist. I started doing this crazy thing of tearing hunks of dirt onto the ground, then trying to build steps up the wall out of the clay-like dirt. Wasn't clay-like enough, I suppose, as I could not put my weight on it without sinking straight back down to base level. I tried packing the dirt harder, but I realized it might take a few hot days of the sun beating down to harden this dirt. It was autumn, and I didn't know how hot the sun would even get the next day. At any rate, I decided to curl into a fetal position and try to conserve my body heat as I endured that night. I was lucky that it was pretty warm for November, and I was at least able to get some sleep between then and dawn. I was awakened with cold, wet dirt being kicked in my face by the laughing hyena man 10 feet above my prison. When he saw that he woke me up, he kicked more dirt and pebbles and grass onto me, seeming to be highly entertained by my suffering. I wondered if he was going to eat me or what. But as soon as he had arrived, he departed. That day I spent calling out to my neighbors and trying to build steps that I could climb up, out of the hole. This time, rather than trying to climb them, or place any weight on them at all, I merely tried to pound them down to be as dense as possible, and then I prayed that they would harden, if allowed to set. So the shouting to my neighbors was my attempt to try to get me rescued that day, but the building of the stairs was in case I was still going to be there by the next day. At sundown, my prisoner and master came to visit and laugh at me again. I started to notice more details about the Dogman this time. His epidermis was quite dark under his lighter gray fur, but it wasn't any kind of shade of skin that I'd ever seen on any animal, other than maybe my old mutt from when I was a kid. That dog had light blue colored skin, and this big one that stood up, he had blue skin too. This one's shade was a much darker one, but still, it was not based on the same color tones as we humans are. Yet when it opened its mouth, its tongue and its gums appeared reddish, just the same as human beings. This was a truly exotic-looking animal, and I could have stared at it all day and night. Its visits never lasted more than 30 or 40 seconds, though it seemed. I was getting so hungry that I wondered if eating dirt would stop the hunger pains in my stomach. I had heard that some people get addicted to eating dirt, and it had lots of minerals in it, like literally. I was also really thirsty, and my throat was too hoarse to shout for help any longer. Things were not looking good for me, which proved highly entertaining to the Dogman. My energy waned, and I began to wonder why the creature didn't just jump down into the hole and finish me off already. What was he waiting for? The rest of the story is a little dicey to tell, as I know I was somewhat delirious by that point. The Dogman came to me in the morning, and my memory is that it jumped down into the hole to lean down over me. I watched, laying on my back, too weak to do much of anything else. The creature smelled my eyes, and my crotch and my feet. I couldn't help but smell him when he was down there with me. His odor was one of death. It made me feel like I was going to be nauseous. I saw bugs literally crawling all over this matted fur monster. That, combined with him smelling like walking diarrhea, caused me to be physically ill all over the bottom of that grave. At least, that was how I remembered it. I'm told a mailman is who found me in the back. He said that my mailbox got too full, so he rang the doorbell and nobody answered. Walking around the back, he saw that the yard had been raked into piles, but that the piles had been blown around a bit, and that the yard was covered in orange and brown once again. It seemed strange to him that the lawn should be left in this in-between state, unmanaged, for a couple or 3 days, which was the same as the mailbox in the front. Then the mailman nearly stepped into my hole, and he almost became the second victim of the Dogman on my property. I have these weird memories of being airlifted by entities that were sometimes space aliens, and other times the cast of MASH. You know, the Colonel Potter cast. I imagine this is what the EMT workers look like to me in my delirious state. So I was rescued, but it wasn't really a laughing matter at the time. Everyone assumed I had dug the trench on my property by myself, then trapped myself inside it. When I pointed out that this made 0 sense, people just nodded in agreement. That was their point. To them, I was no longer making any sense. In retrospect, I have to admit that assuming I had gone bonkers was an awful lot easier to believe than that I had been being systematically harassed by a werewolf who knew how to dig a trench as well as any soldier from World War I. I mean, that is a lot to ask people to accept. If they could feel what I feel in my neck on days when the weather changes, then they'd believe me. Well, maybe not. So I did get out of that house, but my old career was over. I just moved to a new location and completely started over in a very different industry. Even though I gave up my old life to rebuild from the bottom up, it felt worth it just to move far enough away that I could never again find myself trapped by the Dogman. If it weren't for Yvonne on the Lizard in Cornwall, could we still hold on or be swallowing Tylenol? I'm trying to tell the truth, but I'm not impartial. We couldn't keep the roof without our Yvonne Marshall. Please join me in thanking Yvonne Marshall on the Lizard in Cornwall for making this episode possible. If you would like to be as kind and glorious and appreciated as Yvonne Marshall, then listen up as our international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman fills you in on the rest of the deets. Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.